I guess that today's talk, as I understand it, came about because my brother Ron Davis suggested to Helen Hathey that we try to get Paul George to speak here. So Helen called Paul George, and he recommended someone who ended up recommending Elsa Schaefer. So it was about 3 or 4 steps involved to get to Elsa Schaefer, who's been a political activist for many, many years now. And so yeah, maybe I'll just read the summary here. The title of the talk is ALEC, which stands for the American Legislative Exchange Council. ALEC buying our state legislative system on behalf of corporate interests. ALEC was initially founded in the 1970s as a secret entity based in Washington, D.C., with legislators and corporate members who wrote legislative bills on behalf of corporate interests in exchange for election campaign funding. Over 2,000 companies have joined, writing legislation to privatize public schools and prisons, weaken voting rights, eviscerate clean air, clean water, and other environmental laws, cripple public worker unions, and endanger public safety. In 2011, Common Cause helped shine a spotlight on ALEC and its activities, and Common Cause and a coalition of organizations have pressured companies to drop their memberships in ALEC. Elsa Schaefer is a progressive activist who has volunteered for Democracy for America and for Common Cause, and she's also fought for publicly funded elections while maintaining her day job working on healthcare reform. So is everything all set, Elsa? Okay, well, please give Elsa a warm welcome.
You're so kind.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really apologize for walking in that way, and I have to tell you, Brian is amazing. Walking out to the parking lot where there were no spaces, there are a lot of interesting games going on this gorgeous day, and I have never come in that way and hadn't realized, I even had the map with me, that it didn't lead to right back here, so apologies. You're nice to all still be here too. And I see a lot of smiling faces, so I'm especially pleased. Could I start by asking if there's anyone in the room who had not heard of ALEC before coming here today? Oh, good. Oh, well, oh, good. Okay, even better. Has anyone heard of Common Cause? Wow.
I'm a member.
Thank you. Me too. We'll see if we can spread that. But it's interesting that as members of Common Cause, you don't know about ALEC. So Common Cause needs to do better communication, which I will take back to them also. Okay, yes. So if I do this. Oh, you can? Okay, good. My AV specialist, my AV team. So if you know of Common Cause, you know how fervent we are about getting money out of elections campaign. I would like to say publicly funded elections really needs to be our goal. And boy, are we getting ever so slowly there, little by little. One of the counters to that, and Common Cause actually was started by John Gardner in 1970. In about 73, ALEC had its initial formations and has really evolved and flowed over time. So I'm going to see. I went up one and it didn't. Oh, okay. Now I even have the right buttons. ALEC is supposedly a nonprofit entity, or I mean, it declares itself that way, and therefore it gets tax benefits, which Common Cause is questioning. It also says it is nonpartisan, and we'll deal with that in a little bit as well. Common Cause's roots are really completely nonpartisan, and it doesn't propone candidates, it goes after issues and tries to uphold the Constitution, especially when the Constitution is correct, which, as we evolve, is not always true. It has state legislators. It's really a very state-based organization, even though it's national. Its members are state legislators and members of corporations. And that's the balance that will get very interesting over time. It was formed in '73 out of a group meeting in Chicago, some of whom had been Ronald Reagan's campaign managers in California, governor, and then when he tried to become president earlier from when he really did. It was proponing federalism more than anything else, so the 50 states owning more of the legislative burden than big old bloated Washington, as we love to say. It really, though, ended up being much more, and this was the purpose, much more of a convenient convening for companies to be able to lobby more effectively. And it's that optimizing of the lobbying effort that we'll really see a lot today. Their task force members wrote what they called model legislation. Sorry, I really like walking around, but I feel as though I should be back here, so that's why you keep seeing this. So in talking about the model legislation, and corporations, as you know, tend to be housed in a specific state. So in creating this 50-state organization and platform for them to work from, they could work with the state houses and be very effective, because a lot of people pay more attention to Washington than they do to what's going on in their state legislators, and yet so much of the legislating that happens, and so much of the barriers that occur that either help or don't help corporate interests occur at the state level. So this was very clever to use the federalist strategy and to say, let's go in and work with our more local people who also get a lot less attention than the people in Washington. Maybe I'll come over here. And so in writing what they call this model legislation, they send legislators back to their state houses with, I've created this brilliant new policy statement, and they're often noted as policy statements. And of the over 1,000 bills that are written by ALEC corporate lobbyists, 20% over time have gotten through state legislatures. And we'll go over what that has done to things too. Let's go to this. Okay. Legislators themselves, and there are about 2,000 of them who are members of ALEC. Legislators pay $50 a member to be able to go to their meetings and to be members of ALEC. Corporations, however, pay many thousands of dollars, and they both pay for a general membership, which can be up to $25,000, as well as they pay for individual task force memberships. And it's on the task forces, of which there are about 9 now, that the legislative work is written and voted on, and it's usually the corporate wish list that happens for there. 4 years ago, before Common Cause got involved in this, there were over 300 corporate members for this. Today, there are only 102, and I have to check this every week because little by little, we're eating away at that. And probably all of you are helping eat away at that too. There are also corporate trade associations and foundations, so that their budget is between $6 and $7 million annually, and we'll look at where that money goes. But there are a lot of companies whose names are familiar. Can you even see this? It's not. Oh, okay. So I'll do a little reading, but some of the current members, both as corporations, can give dues, but they can also, through their foundations, give special grants, like $1 million grant here or there for whatever the reason is at the time. So some of these companies include familiar names: ExxonMobil, the Koch Family Foundation, and Koch Industries. Therefore, AT&T, Coca-Cola, Coors, Kraft Foods, Pfizer, which is a current target of ours, the UPS, interestingly, and FedEx, Comcast and Verizon, Eli Lilly, Altria, which used to be Philip Morris, and the list goes on. But it's a way shorter list than before. As I go backwards. So what do they spend money on? I'm going to start from the bottom up. These task force meetings, they spend a little under $3 million a year on. They have an annual convention in August that they spend $2 million a year on. They also spend $600,000 a year on legislator recruitment, $300,000 a year on childcare at these conferences and task force meetings so that mommy and daddy can be enjoying themselves. And one of the things that, oh, I'm so sorry there's a typo there, but one of the things that really stunned me was the average legislator, please pretend that says $44,000, makes only $44,000 a year. And I was so shocked at that I thought, wait, I can't say that and not prove it. So I went to sources that go by state. And in California, the average salary is closer to $90,000 for a state legislator. But there are places like Texas where it is $7,000. And there are other states, which are smaller, granted, than Texas or California, where it's a certain amount it's a single digit like that. I'll call that, if it's a K, it's a single digit. And then they get a per diem on top of things like that. These are not highly paid people. And if you take California out of it, the next highest state is something like $67,000 for a state legislator. So by definition, ALEC so wisely saw they're not well paid. Most of the legislators end up being able to take this august, elegant setting, nice hotel and spa arena as a family vacation, and they've got childcare and their spouses are there, and there's a lot of money that is put into flying them there and paying those hotel bills. And if you're a $44,000 or a $7,000 a year person with a family, that's very tempting. So when we watch for benefits that we are concerned about our legislators having access to, often that is a Washington, an article about settings in Washington that you hear of. And at least I don't hear of it at all as much at the state level, but we need to be watching that. So the next thing is, so ALEC says we're nonpartisan and we're nonprofit. We'll get to the nonprofit later. So on the nonpartisan, how nonpartisan are they? It is interesting that of their membership, in the leadership positions of their task forces and of the national body, there's one Democrat and 103 people who tend to be Republican. They've given awards over time, I'll just whip through some of this, to people like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, who you may have heard of, both Bushes, the Koch brothers, Rick Perry, you've heard of, and Tommy Thompson. ALEC alumni, so people who've gone through the state system and were members of ALEC, include John Boehner, Eric Cantor, Joe Wilson, who said to Obama during his speech, "You lie." During the State of the Union speech, "You lie." Dennis Hastert, Tom DeLay, Scott Walker, a guy named Don Rumsfeld, and their speakers have frequently been, many of these people have been there several times, Dick Cheney, Newt Gingrich, Jesse Helms, Dan Quayle, and Milton Friedman. And remember, a lot of it started in Chicago, home of Milton. So they were started, as I said, in this Chicago meeting that was trying to propone federalism in '73. They wanted to do some things that are very familiar to us, of limiting government, having free market operation, federalism, and individual liberty, under which so much can fall, as we know. Then when Reagan did get elected to the presidency, one of the first things he did was to start a presidential task force on federalism. And he knew of this group, ALEC. In fact, he had a lot of friends in ALEC. And he relied heavily on ALEC members to be the people who would be the expert witnesses to come to advise this task force. They over time created task forces on basically anything that a state legislature dealt with. And we know them well, from education to healthcare, civil justice, which has really been damaged badly, telecommunications, and the list goes on. I mentioned before they tend to write over 1,000 bills a year that actually get introduced. And the state legislators take them back to the state legislature, introduce them with big fanfare, and of those, 20% have actually gotten through. I'm very grateful it's not the other end of the 80-20 that do get through, but that 20% can be very devastating. We'll see a map later of what's happening now with healthcare and Obamacare, and why by the time it gets to Washington, a lot of very difficult seeds have been planted in the fields. Over time, they have eviscerated a lot of workers' rights, both lowering wages and reining in union ability to organize. They currently and for 5 years now, have been delighted with the Supreme Court decisions on both Citizens United and McCutcheon, which unleash even more billions to elections. This is my pet peeve. They're opposing any minimum wage increases. They're into privatizing everything from education to prisons, which is a really scary one as well. Thank you. And they also, remember the Florida Trayvon Martin Stand Your Ground law? They are in every single state that's listening, trying to push more and more Stand Your Ground laws. They wrote, actually, the Voter ID Act, so they're the ones who are most actively trying to restrict the right to vote. We know a number of states where this has taken on more and more power, and I'm glad Obama's finally, or I shouldn't say finally, but is talking more verbally about that now. But to me, what the Supreme Court is able to do, and what it's able to do with a lot of influence in many ways, is very scary right now. We've got to go protect the Senate next election and every election. This is one that I really would like. I'd like popular election of the president, and I noticed that was one of the things that they are really against. They like keeping the Electoral College. If you think of the two houses of Congress, there are so many quote-unquote red states in the middle, and many more red states than there are the very populous blue states on the edges to an extent. And in the Senate, so in the House, it's population-based, so that still comes out fairly equal. In the Senate, because you get 2 representatives per state, it really counts to have more states on your side of that equation. That's scary long-term, I do think. They also are pushing harsher border laws and restricting the path to citizenship. They've also, there are just an unbelievable number of acts that they've written, some of which have gotten through at the state level, including the Capital Gains Tax Elimination Act, not yet. They are the ones who proponed the extension of the Bush tax cuts, and generally are helping that top 1% or 0.5% with increasing numbers of loopholes as well as maintaining current loopholes. They've tried over and over and over, and are still at it, to privatize both Medicare and Social Security, and they were leaders opposing the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which Elizabeth Warren was brought in to stand up, and for which she was never nominated as the head. and there's a story there too. And I love the current microphone she has enabled, and I hope she hangs on to it from now till kingdom come. They have succeeded in repealing a lot of pollution protections at the local level, and again are trying to have so much volume of vociferous fight at the local state level that the EPA in Washington feels strictured, and the degree to which we need to continue supporting that national scope for what the EPA is doing and not letting the state language deteriorate it is so important for all of us going forward. They oppose a lot of public health safeguards, as well as a lot of communication about basic public health issues. They've been blocking conservation, and criminalizing environmental protection laws. They're opposing Obamacare, so healthcare reform really, and the dissemination of basic nutrition information. They were very against any of the labeling improvements that we've been getting over time. And they were the ones who wanted to replace Medicaid with a voucher system, especially scary. In 2011, Common Cause was started in 1970. It's done a lot of good work. And in 2011, they were handed almost 1,000 pages of documents from some of these ALEC task forces. ALEC was going merrily along for all these years, since the 70s, so 35 plus years, being very effective. Common Cause finally got this batch of documents, shared it with the Center for Media and Democracy, and the two of them together analyzed laws that were passed in various states and what had been written by the task forces. And there's a fabulous movie, a documentary that Bill Moyers did that I highly recommend, that compares the language side by side. There are some state legislatures who passed bills where not one word was changed from what was written for the ALEC task force. And there are a lot of lobbyists in there writing these things also. This was the first time, so Common Cause also, which you may know, is both a 501c3 and a 504c3. So that the 501 does not, is a nonprofit and does not lobby. The 504 can actively discuss these issues with members of Congress. And even though I love giving my contributions to the 501c3, it's also really important to fund the people who are doing the analytical work and then being able to take that conversation to legislators to say, wake up, do you realize what's going on here? Right now, so remember 4 years ago, 2011, before Common Cause got that batch of papers, there were over 300 members of ALEC, corporate members of ALEC. And it's stunning how many of our brethren in Silicon Valley were members also. But you've probably been reading a lot of headlines recently about a number who've been leaving it. It is now down to 102 corporations, and I'll give you an eBay example shortly, which is really wonderful, I do think. So some of the companies that have recently left include BP, which cannot stand any more negative press, as we all know. eBay, which a few months ago we were all worried about, got a letter in October signed by, it's no longer just Common Cause and the Center for Media and Democracy, by over 80 groups, and we'll see that list, and I bet you have memberships among some of them. 80 groups wrote a very simple letter, because they've gotten it so well codified, saying, but eBay, you stand for this, and yet look what ALEC is doing, and contrasting those two. And it's the simplest, most eloquent way to get that message across, and it's been working. And they tend to go one company at a time. So only in this last year has Microsoft left. Only the last 6 months have Facebook, Google, Yahoo, Yelp, and Intuit left. That's pretty recent stuff, given that this has been out in the public eye for a good while. They're still very heavily supported by the Koch brothers, and it's so in their best interest to keep that going. So we need to make them very lonely over time. Their current most familiar issues are the environment, again, trying to get the EPA out of state work. And boy, do I want the EPA to make national decisions. Healthcare, again, with Obamacare. Tobacco, they're still working on. And they're really trying to unrestrict campaign finance funding to a great degree, and boy, we see how successful that is. They object to their regulation of greenhouse gases. And in this day and age, even to be able to state that as a heading of something is really kind of mind-blowing. And maybe we live in a bubble here, I don't know. But there's too much information out there. The majority of the US population recognizes the climate crisis and the man-made nature of it too. They are vociferously against anything to do with cap and trade, which we have now in California, and don't even begin to talk about a carbon tax, which we should call a carbon fee. And they also love to talk about the EPA's assault on state sovereignty. So remember, they are federalists, and their roots started with this idea of federalism needs to be proponed. We need to get all that fat out of Washington, and they don't understand us on a local level. We need to do it here. So the idea that they cleverly go to, state sovereignty, this central entity doesn't know our area well enough. And they use a lot of legal language to obfuscate the issue that's really going on. And that's where we need to nail them on it, because we can talk plain English, we all know that. Now, this is a combination picture that I decided to leave up here because, another one of their areas is healthcare reform. Don't like this idea of healthcare, we ALEC want healthcare freedom. Healthcare freedom means we want to do away with Medicare and Medicaid, especially Medicaid. We want to give you a voucher system instead. We'll give you a voucher for less than it costs to go to any reasonable doc, and you can choose on your own. So I'm sure over your lifetimes you've read or you've had the pleasure of being told you should read your healthcare policy, or you should choose from these 5 policies if you work for a certain company. And it's the one time of year, it's almost worse than taxes. Maybe, I think it is worse than taxes actually. And the fine print in these things can get very interesting. And the idea of I'm in my day job, I often am in consumer marketing, and in the idea of people willingly being able to want to comb through all of that detail and then also understand it, because it's often not very clearly written to grasp easily, it is mind-boggling to me. They're for the Freedom of Choice in Healthcare Information Act, therefore. And now I can't even read my little words here. They're very, that's why I can't go over there. They're very against the mandate. So, the Supreme Court is now hearing and is about to decide on the mandate portion of Obamacare, which insists that every one of us have some form of health insurance. Because if the people who are very healthy and young and are not going to, in the normal course of the next 20 years, deteriorate the way I'm deteriorating, for one thing. If they are allowed not to buy health insurance because unless they're hit by a truck, they may not need serious health care, if all of those people are taken out of the pool for the current health insurance, which, by the way, we should also get rid of. There's no reason to have health insurance. I mean, a country with health insurance, it just needs to be Medicare for all. Give me a break. Or single payer. Easy to say, and I'm sure you say it too, but then making it happen. Taking out all of those contributions from the insurance industry that help re-elect a lot of our legislators. So again, publicly financed elections, please. So they're behind a lot of the effort that has now gotten to the Supreme Court. They often file amicus briefs for a lot of these court issues in order to support the denigration of those regulations. But they're trying to make all of Obamacare illegal by taking away that mandate, saying you can't do that. You can't force people to have to pay for something. And they're very anti-single payer. Boy, they're determined it's not going to get through a single state legislature. And I keep seeing it, almost get there in California, and I keep wondering, now that I know how much ALEC is doing on this front. And they also argue even, the minimum protections, such as we all get certain tests and children get certain basic care in healthcare right now, they're arguing against that as well, because that takes away our choice. So the picture they use on their webpage at the top is of an African-American couple that are the world's healthiest looking people. And they're the ones in the hospital, and there's a white doctor, of course, helping. And when I first borrowed this screenshot, I only got the patient's face in the end. Oops, so I can't do this. But I don't think it's that clear on this screen, but his skin, even when you see it blown up, his skin is so perfect. And I keep thinking, I don't know why he's in the hospital. But on their webpage, it says, oh, good, we're taking care of people. And the subtle messaging that comes across through all of this is it's really sad, but it's really worth analyzing, too. I chopped off the edges of the map which are gray. So California is one gray state, and then all of the Northeast states not including New York, but all the New England states, do not yet have any form of legislation going through the state houses or that has already gone through. Every single other state has had one of three things happen. Luckily, it's the majority. The purple are still in process, so it hasn't been passed yet. But they have activity in every single state that hasn't yet already passed legislation that either knocks out Obamacare or knocks out some form of Obamacare. And that's the pale purple. The dark purple states have already enacted statutory measures, and the sort of gold yellowy states have actually enacted constitutional amendments. So the degree to which we now have a Congress which just passed a budget, even though it's not that actionable a budget, that is doing away with Obamacare. If you hear that and you read our local headlines saying, oh, but then we have to go to appropriations and, it probably really won't come down to that again. But look at what's happening on the state level. Look at this huge movement that's rising up. That's going to affect all of us. I can't heartily enough suggest really following that and being very worried about it. And the Supreme Court ruling on that individual mandate is going to come out this summer. And the third example I'll give you, they have many examples of things they're working on, but the third one I thought was really charming, and that was tobacco. Now, I thought in 1950 we figured out that tobacco was bad for you. There's a fabulous movie out right now, by the way, Merchants of Doubt. By any chance, has anyone here seen that?
I read the book.
Oh, and you're right. And I haven't read the book, but I've heard it's an excellent book, though, too. I just hope it stays around long enough and really gets a lot of play. But it points out that the tobacco industry and its spin then helped create, by 1970, the whole flame retardant chemical industry, which has pounds of flame retardants in our the thing they're objecting to right now is that Australia, or that ALEC's objecting to, Australia has, in 2011, banned any tobacco products coming into Australia in anything other than a plain brown wrapper, where 90% of the front and 75% of the front has to have huge graphic warnings about how bad smoking is for you. And the branding can't be in a logo typeface. It has to be in a certain size and certain typeface. And so the ALEC is actually spending a lot of time talking with legislators about they're taking away a corporation's most basic right, their intellectual property, i.e. their branding. I've never seen such a clever, turning of events, but I love that as an example. Recently, a lot of us were out standing in front of eBay saying, why aren't you dropping your membership in ALEC? So a group of 80 groups that have joined with Common Cause and so many others wrote this very simple letter that I'm going to show you some examples of in October. And 2.5 months later, December 19th, they announced that they were dropping their membership in ALEC. A lot of other Silicon Valley companies had also just done that. And I can't go close, so I won't do this, but they point out that eBay's stated values of supporting the environment and being pro-immigration are in complete antithesis to a lot of the work that ALEC's doing. So they keep pointing out that inconsistency and therefore getting rid of more and more companies. You won't be able to see any of this, but there's a list of 80 different groups that are now signing these letters. And the latest one that everyone's targeting is Pfizer. So Pfizer got a letter earlier in March. They tend to go one company at a time, and they're trying to take the major ones. They've already gotten, Merck has already resigned. Eli Lilly is still a member, though. Johnson & Johnson has resigned. And if you go industry by industry, there comes a tipping point where you end up thinking, I can't not do this. And Pfizer's really sticking out there in the big pharma end of things. So we're very hopeful that they shortly, their 2.5 months isn't up yet, but we hope that you read the headlines very soon to hear that Pfizer's not there. If anybody owns stock in Pfizer, do write them a letter. That could be lovely. Sorry? It sounds as though most of you know Common Cause. There's a lot on their website. You can just Google Common Cause. About ALEC, but also about publicly financed elections. We'd love to have any of your help getting rid of the other 102 that are funding it. The Koch brothers can still do a lot funding it, but the tipping point has more than tipped, and we'd love to be able to see a rush of the dropping of the next 100. The other thing is on both the Common Cause site and on the Center for Media and Democracy site, you can click on lists of both who's still there as well as what legislators are still attending these meetings. And that's a little harder to find, and there are very few Californians, surprise. But for any of your relatives who are in other states or your good friends, it's worth looking at that list and saying, did you know so-and-so actually goes to these meetings and again, I feel badly about their salaries, but that's another way at some of this. But the corporations are the ones who fund it, and that's the easiest thing to get rid of first. Sorry that this was difficult to see. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts? Yes.
Sorry, where's the hand?
Oh, I'm sorry, the mic. They trained me to say, please wait for the mic. I didn't do that.
Hi, I have a hard time believing that ALEC could make such progress without the collusion of the courts. And I wonder how they're able to engage the courts, and sometimes I even wonder about the Supreme Court. They just seem to just fall in line with all of these activities.
Especially recently. So I think there was some incredulity passing around some of the room as you were speaking. On the current I maybe shouldn't touch this, but on the current Supreme Court, other than Sandra Day O'Connor, would be lovely to have back there again, relatively speaking, as a Reagan appointee. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg has often said she feels bereft without having her there also. But there are 5 Republicans, 5 people who grew up in Catholic, and this is, the last thing I'm saying is, oh, this camp and that camp, although it sure sounded that way. But there's a lot of heritage on the current court. And we have this young guy, John Roberts, who's chief, that he's going to last a long time. I don't, both Scalia and Thomas go to the Koch brothers' dues for 2 weeks at a time, and one of the issues Common Cause is tackling right now, and is the only one to really loudly tackle it, is judicial integrity, judicial ethics. So at the state level, the judges have certain ethics they have to follow that are codified. That is not true of the Supreme Court. How did we let the Supreme Court not have those same ones? So any support you can lend Common Cause for making that true for all the judicial system, not exempting the highest, it would be key. But there's a lot of, because ALEC can write amicus briefs to any of those courts, they can have influence that way. Both Justice Scalia, Antonin Scalia, and Justice Thomas have spent up to 2 weeks there. So the former head of Common Cause, Bob Edgar, was part of the picket line outside their Southern California Rancho whatever rally and picketing, complaining about who was inside the rooms. But all of the ALEC meetings are private. They're not open. So we don't really know what goes on in there.
That's right.
It's not okay. Sir?
Yes. Okay, you're describing another organization that is bothering me, and that organization is called APEC.
Yes.
And they do the same kinds of things that, since J Street came onto the scene, I think they're having trouble with individual memberships, so they have corporate memberships. You scratch my back, I scratch yours type of thing going on. And we've seen what happened in Congress within the last month. There's something like a overthrow of the United States government and things like that. So it's amazing. So what is your comment on that?
I have to see. So technically I'm representing Common Cause today. I'm also a human being over this side. I'm trying to differentiate those two. You will notice on the list of 80, if you could have seen it, that there are a lot of religious organizations, from Catholic Charities to the Unitarian Universalists, as groups and their service committees, who are proponing getting rid of ALEC. A lot of those. I'll just say, in the United States foreign aid budget, Israel has by far the lion's share. It's very heavily supported in the U.S. And recently, when they needed to refund, I think it was money for the shield, there was a lot, it was almost a universal vote. in favor of it. And APAC is very effective lobbying legislators. And I think it is a concern. I think Netanyahu, who was probably funded by Edelman to get over here and to do all of this, and Edelman was in, watching at the time, bent so far over backwards that I think there's a reaction to that going on right now. And you hear Obama being really furious and not calming down about it. And I think maybe that was sort of one step too far that may have repercussions that might help balance things again. But, getting elected by saying never going to have a Palestinian state that's tricky. We saw those headlines too.
Yes. This week, Senator Harry Reid announced that he was resigning, which I think is a good thing, quite frankly, because Senator Reid was, weak and stupid. And I'm one who's just tired of weak and stupid Democrats. Democrats that just won't fight. That's one of the things when I see what the Koch brothers are doing, it makes me wonder, where are the good billionaires? They're sitting on the sideline.
Tom Steyer in San
Well, I know
Francisco.
there's a few, but he's just a little billionaire. He's just kind of just got a couple billion rather than tens of billions.
Warren Buffett and Bill Gates.
But they're not
doing
contributing
interesting
politically
things
the way that the Koch brothers are.
Oh,
and,
true, very true.
and the Democrats just roll over and let the Republicans have everything they want. Really about the only reason to vote for a Democrat is that they're not Republican, and they're not doing a good enough job of being not Republican for me. And I'm sort of frustrated about that because Obama's almost to the right of Ronald Reagan on a lot of stuff. And it's wishing so much that Elizabeth Warren would run. Because Hillary's just not impressing me yet.
Or is Elizabeth Warren's role to continue with her unfettered microphone, because she only reports to the people who elected her,
Thank you.
and to keep Hillary less far to the right, to your right, and to continue to be, to own that microphone, versus if she did run, and I'm very close on the other side to her, but if she did run, then the Republicans would have all those great one-liners to pit against whoever won that primary in the general election. That's the one thing that scares me. Whereas in her current role, she's not agreeing, she's not endorsing Hillary, but she's there reminding everybody of the truly populist vantage point on so much of this. Harry Reid, I disagree. I don't think he's stupid, but that's a safe thing to say. And I think there are elements in him that have been a fighter. I look forward to a different voice coming into that role. I completely agree. Yeah. I always wanted to change his voice somehow. But oh, I'm so sorry. But I think, change happens over time. I think the Obama we're seeing now is a hell of a lot closer to the guy who ran in the primary and in the general election in 2008 than he was as in that 6 years. So I don't know if anyone knows Myers-Briggs. He's an INTJ. If he were an ENTJ, he'd be more the fighter. The INTJ is a little more the guy who and he saw what happened with Hillary's attempt at health care when she was First Lady. And he thought, no, I'm not going to do it exclusive of Congress. Let me show the path, and then Congress can come in and own it and do that. And it took a lot of years for him to learn that lesson, which is beyond my understanding. I completely agree. But he keeps talking about the fourth quarter. The first few days in this new year, he did a lot. So I'm pleased. Sir.
Hi, Elsa. I respect your efforts and your experience and the erudition of your presentation.
I hear a but coming.
Yeah, but my perspective, and I say this humbly actually, but it just happens to include having worked at 3 White Houses as an Air Force officer over a period of time, observed things in Washington, and my youthful...
Sorry, worked in what role as an Air Force officer?
Arms control, White House Science Office, and other analysis in Reagan, Bush 1, and Clinton. And I watched all 3 presidents up close and got to know them, and none of them were fully fit or qualified to be president, obviously, and damaged us more than they helped. I'll be happy to prove that. More significantly, I went to Washington as a Republican and a Catholic, first time to graduate professional school, and I'm now obviously a liberal, an atheist, okay, and a progressive. And I'm grateful for that. I don't want to, it's not about me. You brought up Obama. He is a failure as a president, and that's not just my view. And Ralph Nader, whom I spent conversations with this past fall on Obama, declared Obama to be a con man and an opportunist. And the tragedy is he had control of the House and the Senate for 2 years, and he focuses on a health care bill as bad as ALEC was written by the health care industry, the insurance industry. That's why Pelosi didn't know what was in it. Seriously. Obama promised us Medicare, as you made appropriate reference to, for all of us that could have been phased in starting at 55 going down to birth, and he sold us out. He was sold out to the health insurance companies before he even got nominated. That's the tragedy. Both parties are corrupt up to their eyeballs. So are the presidential candidates. Obviously, campaign finance reform is long overdue. And Common Cause's efforts, I wish we could do more and more effectively. That's where the focus ought to be, is to expose the corruption, the self-dealing. You can't trust either party. And Harry Reid, by the way, I included the people I don't trust a dime's worth in Washington. He's been incredibly weak as a majority leader. Barbara Mikulski would have been so much more effective and entertaining.
I'd love that.
Okay? We've got to decide, do we want a government that values the future, that respects informed wisdom, and wants justice for all of us?
Yeah.
And that's the consensus we need.
So who is going to run and on what platform? And how do you, in this day and age of 360 million people, the internet, mass media, media where, media consolidation also, boy, is that scary and interesting. But where branding of who's saying it on the internet really still counts. Our education system has got to raise critical thinkers who understand, well, what are the sources that's saying that, that's coming from that?
Well,
and I suggest there's not enough of that going on, fully enough. And the most recent, let's see, I guess it was the extension of the omnibus bill that extended, paying for the government in January, included giving more funding to those 2 big parties you're pointing to. I would love to know how, in this day and age, we parse apart the ability to have people who can stick to their guns, or isn't that a terrible phrase? Stick to their values and get through the ranks. And there's so much embedded machine on absolutely both of those huge. What other major country can you point to that has 2 parties, not 6 or 10 or something like that? We're really atypical with that. And by definition, they tend to sound more and more like each other in many ways. Now, right now, they're sounding very different in some ways. But the fact that the Democratic Party, one of only 2 major parties, can be so dependent on money still. I mean, that to me is the biggest, scariest thing. And that our newly elected freshmen can walk into their orientation in November before they're official and be told in the first sentence of the first speech, and this was by Dan Lundgren too, whom Ami Bera kicked out 4 years ago. Gentlemen and gentlewomen, today is the first day of fundraising for your next campaign. And we elect, they campaign, I mean, they have an election every 2 years in the House. That's 435 races every 2 years. What is this about? Why, that means they never let go of their campaign staffs. They can't. And to spend 50 to 70% of their time fundraising rather than debating on the floor on our behalf. So I really suggest, until we get money out of the system, that they're taught on the way, well, you're not going to be reelected if. So until we have well enough educated, engaged, caring voters across the system, more than 30% voting, I might add, we're asking for it. So I think at the grassroots level, I want my vote to count, and I don't want a Coke dollar or billion to be able to buy it. And we've seen campaigns, I hope this isn't a bad example, but like Meg Whitman's for governor, where she outspent her opponent and did not win. And there are a number of examples like that. It's up to all of us to understand human nature and to be able to create dialogue, not friction, I think, but to be firm with those who may see things differently, or who we might think are not in the know enough about certain topics. It's up to us to spend time in those conversations. But you've got to start from, where is that other person and how do I bring them to this understanding, instead of bashing, I think. Or you'll turn them off immediately and never get there.
Nader and I decided in September in his offices, 25% of the American public consistently informed, advocating, demanding the wisdom, the common cause that you portray here, fundamentally could change the scenario if we could coordinate that 25%. There's my question. Do you agree with that?
Or I even say 37, but 25 might do it because of the tipping point. So the key about that 25%, and that was a terrific point, good point to end on too, that the key about the 25% is that's an activist 25%. This room is definitely an activist part of that group, I'm sure. The degree to which we can build to that, that creates huge media headlines, that creates huge awareness in Congress, and that does create the tipping point. Sometimes I would say 27, 35, maybe up to 37, but it's not you don't need a majority. You need a vocal, intelligent, clear, reasonable minority. Is that Bob gone? Yes. Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry.
When Terry said, I think, something about Nancy Pelosi and others not knowing what was in the Affordable Care Act bill.
It's the 1,600 pages.
I'm plowing my way through hard choices and thinking about Hillary's support of the Trans-Pacific Partnership thing, and that,
I know.
I wonder if people are saying that if they rush that through, nobody's going to know what's in that. Does ALEC have its clutches on that one too?
No. So the TPP is a huge issue right now, and Obama is not. Obama said no to fast tracking, but he hasn't said no to the TPP. Oh my God! And a lot of that we haven't read yet, but things are sneaking out little by little. So that's one. So I want you to work on Pfizer, and the TPP could go very quickly if we don't really stay attached to that. So Elizabeth Warren has a fabulous YouTube out now on why the TPP is cracked. Make it go viral, spread it to everybody. And if you're not on Elizabeth Warren's YouTube channel, it is so entertaining. It is fabulous. And she's taking on more and more issues, trying to get her to take on health care. And she's on the health committee in the Senate. Boy, will that be a great spokesperson. But thank you for bringing up the TPP. That's a really dangerous one. The Trans-Pacific Partnership. which is a negotiated trade deal with a lot. So they're saying, the other thing that amuses me, oh, it's the antidote to NAFTA? No, it's not. But it has a lot of environmental and workers' rights kinds of elements to it that would allow an international court to decide, oh no, but that U.S. rule is about the environment is unreasonable. We don't need to follow that after all. That kind of thing. So it's worth finding out about. And you're right, it's hard to find out about it because we can't read it right now. But nobody else can either, so don't pass it if you can't read it.
I have a few questions back here.
Is that Bob?
There's a few things I want to mention, bring up. One is ALEC. ALEC seems to be opposed to specific proposals to clean up the environment. Do they have a sort of an official stand that global warming is not real?
Yes.
Or that's ALEC's position, basically?
Yes, they say it's
okay.
not real, and I had it earlier, but on a slide that was too dense. So when Google finally dropped it, you're probably referring to this. Can you not hear? Sorry? Oh, sorry. So the group of 80 wrote Google in October. Was that October?
Well,
yeah, and in December, Eric Schmidt, Google finally dropped ALEC. And then Eric, who of course is part of the Schmidt Family Foundation that is 100%
Well, anyway, you've
environmental.
answered the first question.
Okay.
The other thing is, I just want to comment that everyone in Congress is taking money from the fossil fuel industry. Every single one of them.
Yep.
Bernie Sanders is taking less than any others.
Yep.
Okay. He's taken 1,000, while others have taken hundreds of thousands or millions. And I think it might be helpful in our strategy to highlight this problem, the need for public financing, is to call it bribery. It is, in effect, bribery.
It's
But
legalized
I think we should,
bribery.
yes, it's legal, that's right.
Legalized bribery.
Right, it's legalized bribery.
This is what Larry Lessig calls
Yes, I
it.
agree with that. And I think in public discussion, I think we should use the word legal bribery. And
Because it's easy.
we're not doing that. And I think we should use the word bribery.
Okay, room, that's another assignment. Legalized bribery. Got to get rid of legalized bribery. And do you know in England they have 6 weeks to campaign? And there's no private special interest money that is allowed in campaigns, and then they have a silent period for either 10 days or 2 weeks before the election, so you can think. How'd you like a 6-week? How would you like a 6-month electioneering process rather than a 2 to 4 year? Yeah, I do too. I know. I do.
Okay, lunch is ready, Elsa. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.